The border of the Zyran Dominion was not a place where mistakes survived. Out here, the stars were dimmer, swallowed by the shadow of a civilization that had ruled this quadrant for over 1,000 years. Every trade lane was monitored. Every signal was catalogued. Every unknown presence was treated as a potential threat and eliminated before it could become one. So when a lone ship appeared, drifting silently across the edge of restricted space, it didn't trigger panic. It triggered curiosity. Unidentified vessel entering Sector K-77, the sensor officer announced aboard the Dominion warship Valkyr. No escort, no stealth masking, no defensive posture. Commander Threx leaned forward slightly, his elongated silhouette framed by the cold blue glow of tactical displays. His species did not blink often, but when they did, it was usually a sign of deep interest. "Origin?" he asked. Scanning a pause, then with faint disbelief, "Terran." A low murmur rippled across the bridge. "Humans," another officer scoffed. "This far out." Threx allowed a faint clicking sound, his version of amusement. Humanity had only recently joined the interstellar stage. Fast learners, yes. Surprisingly resilient, certainly. But in the grand scale of galactic power, they were insignificant. "Open a channel," Threx ordered. The void between ships remained silent for a moment, then a signal bridged the distance. The human vessel came into view on the main display. It was underwhelming. A mid-sized warship at best. Clean design, minimal visible weaponry, no aggressive posturing, no escort ships lurking nearby. Just one ship, floating where it absolutely did not belong. The transmission connected. A human appeared, calm, composed, dressed in a simple dark uniform. No medals flashing, no signs of fear, just steady eyes. "This is Captain Elias Varn of the Terran Fleet," he said. "We request safe passage through this sector." There was a brief silence on the Valkyr's bridge. Then laughter. Not loud, not chaotic, just sharp, dismissive amusement. "Safe passage," one officer muttered, "through Dominion-controlled territory." Threx raised a hand, silencing the noise. "You are trespassing," he replied coldly. "Turn your vessel around immediately or face termination." The human captain didn't react. No visible tension, no hesitation. Just a quiet breath. "Request acknowledged," Varn said. "We will maintain current course." That did it. The laughter died instantly. "Arrogant," Threx hissed, "or suicidal." He gestured sharply. "Fire a warning shot." Outside, the Valkyr's forward cannons charged, energy building into a concentrated pulse of controlled destruction. A moment later, the shot tore through space, passing dangerously close to the human ship, close enough to vaporize anything careless. The Terran vessel didn't move, didn't raise shields, didn't respond with weapons. It just stayed there. "Why aren't they reacting?" the tactical officer asked, unease creeping into their voice. Threx narrowed his gaze. "Because they don't understand the situation," he said. "Primitive instincts, freeze or flee." But something felt off. The human captain hadn't flinched. Not even slightly. "Scan for reinforcements," Threx ordered. "Already done, Commander. There's nothing. No fleet signatures, no cloaked vessels. The area is clear." Clear. Completely, perfectly clear. And yet, Threx leaned forward again, studying the human ship more closely. "Open channel again." The connection snapped back to life. "Captain Varn," Threx said slowly, "this is your final warning. Withdraw now or you will be destroyed." For the first time, the human captain's expression shifted. Not fear, not anger, something colder. "You believe this is a mistake," Varn said quietly. Threx's mandibles clicked. "It is." A pause. Then the human spoke again, voice calm but carrying a weight that didn't match the situation. "No," he said. "It is." Behind him, one of his officers turned, eyes widening as something flashed across their console. "Sir," the officer whispered, "we're receiving new signals." Threx frowned. "From where?" "That's the problem. They're not coming from anywhere." Another officer chimed in, panic rising. Multiple contacts appearing, no warp signatures, no entry vectors. The main display flickered. Then, a new blip appeared. Then another. Then 10. Then dozens. Then hundreds. All around them. In every direction. As if space itself had suddenly decided to reveal something it had been hiding all along. Threx's posture stiffened. "What is this?" he demanded. No one answered. Because no one understood. On the human ship, Captain Varn finally stood from his command chair. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped closer to the viewport, watching as the darkness beyond began to change. Stars didn't move, but something behind them did. Massive shapes, too large to comprehend at first, began to unfold from the void itself, like shadows peeling away from reality. The sensor officer's voice broke completely. "Commander, those aren't signals." A pause. "They're ships." Silence slammed into the bridge. Threx felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. On the open channel, Varn spoke one last time. "You thought this was a lone vessel," he said. Another pause. Then, "You were wronged." Behind him, the galaxy began to fill with warships. For a long moment, no one on the Valkyr spoke. They simply stared. The tactical display, once a clean, empty field with a single Terran signature, was now drowning in contacts. Hundreds, no, thousands of signals blinked into existence, each one perfectly stable, perfectly positioned. And none of them had arrived. No warp trails, no jump signatures, no distortion wake. They hadn't entered the system. They had been there the whole time. "That's not possible," the sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling despite years of discipline. "We scanned this sector repeatedly. There was nothing, absolutely nothing." Commander Threx didn't respond immediately. His gaze was locked on the main viewport, where the darkness of space was beginning to shift. At first it was subtle. Stars flickered, as if something massive was passing between them and the Valkyr. Then shapes emerged, edges catching faint starlight, outlines forming where there had been only emptiness seconds ago. Warships. Human warships. Sleek, angular, and unnervingly uniform. They didn't rush forward or scatter like a hastily assembled fleet. They moved with quiet precision, sliding into formation as if guided by a single, unified mind. Encirclement. Complete. Perfect. "How many?" Threx asked, his voice lower now. The tactical officer swallowed hard. "Still counting, but it's already beyond any recorded Terran fleet capacity. This doesn't match any intelligence we have." "Because our intelligence is wrong," another officer said, barely above a whisper. On the human flagship, Captain Elias Varn stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the holographic projection of the battlefield bloom into life. The void was no longer empty. It was theirs. "Phase 1 successful," a Terran officer reported. "All units in position, cloak dispersion complete." Varn nodded once. "Status of Dominion fleet." "Surrounded, sir. No escape vectors." There was no triumph in the room. No cheers, just quiet focus. They had trained for this moment for decades. Now it was simply unfolding. Back on the Valkyr, the illusion of control was cracking. "Raise all defensive screens," Threx snapped. "Form perimeter formation. I want targeting solutions on every hostile vessel." "Sir," the weapons officer said, struggling to keep composure, "there are too many targets. We can't prioritize." "Then fire on their command ship," Threx roared. "The one we were communicating with, destroy it." Cannons across the Dominion fleet began to charge, energy building in unstable waves as crews rushed to respond to a threat they didn't understand. But even as they prepared to fire, something changed. The human fleet stopped moving. Every ship, every single one, went completely still. Then, in perfect synchronization, they lit up, not with chaotic bursts of weapon fire or shield flares, but with something deeper. Something heavier. Lines of light traced across their hulls, pulsing in steady rhythms. Entire ships seemed to hum with contained power, as if each one held a star within its core. The void itself reacted. Light bent unnaturally around the Terran fleet. Space seemed to ripple, like heat distortion magnified 1,000 times. Dominion systems flickered. Energy spike across all human vessels, the sensor officer shouted. This isn't weapon charging, this is something else. What is it? Threx demanded. No one answered, because no one had ever seen anything like it. On the human flagship, a young officer stared at the readings, awe creeping into his voice. They're seeing it for the first time. Varn's gaze didn't waver. Good, he said quietly. Let them understand. Across all open frequencies, Dominion, neutral, even distant monitoring stations, a signal broadcast outward. Not encrypted. Not hidden. A message meant to be heard. We are the Terran Armada, Varn's voice echoed through the void. You have mistaken our silence for weakness. The Dominion fleet hesitated. Just for a second. But in war, a second was everything. Threx felt it, that shift in momentum, in perception, the moment when confidence began to fracture into doubt. Still, he forced his voice to remain steady. All ships prepare to fire on my command. His claws tightened against the command console. They're still outnumbering us in firepower, he insisted, more to himself than anyone else. We've crushed empires larger than this. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Because this wasn't just a fleet. This was something else. Something built in secret. Something the galaxy had never been meant to see. On the human flagship, Varn raised his hand. Every Terran ship responded instantly. Power levels surged. Space trembled. Commander, a Dominion officer whispered, fear finally breaking through. They're not preparing to defend. Threx's eyes widened. They're preparing to. Varn lowered his hand. Begin. And in that moment, the galaxy realized its mistake. Too late, the Dominion fired first. It was the only choice left to Commander Threx that still felt like control. Fire everything, he roared. Across the Valkyr and the surrounding fleet, thousands of weapon systems ignited at once. Plasma lances, ion storms, gravitic spears, each engineered to tear through capital-class vessels, erupted into the void. The space between fleets lit up like a dying sun. For a brief, desperate moment, it looked like victory. Then the shots reached the human armada. And stopped. Not exploded. Not deflected in a visible shield flare. They simply stopped existing in motion. The plasma froze mid-flight. The energy beams curved unnaturally, bending as if space had forgotten how to carry them forward. Some vanished entirely, erased as though the concept of their trajectory had been deleted from reality. On every Dominion bridge, confusion turned instantly into panic. Impact denied, someone shouted. All projectiles neutralized without detonation. That's impossible, another voice snapped. Nothing can stop a full-spectrum volley like that. Commander Threx didn't speak. He was staring at the human fleet. Because now they were moving. Not reacting. Not defending. Advancing. Slowly. Deliberately. As if the Dominion had just finished speaking, and humanity was now responding. On the lead Terran vessel, Captain Elias Varn watched the chaos unfold with unsettling calm. Around him, his bridge crew moved with precision. No shouting, no panic, only structured coordination. Enemy first strike analyzed, an officer reported. Energy absorption complete, no hull strain detected across our formation. Varn nodded, return fire protocol. Awaiting authorization. A pause stretched across the bridge. Then Varn spoke quietly. Authorize. The change was immediate. Every Terran ship responded as one organism. Not hundreds of vessels acting together, but a single intelligence spread across thousands of hulls. Energy didn't charge like conventional weapons. It accumulated, like gravity gathering inevitability. On Dominion scanners, readings began to spike beyond comprehension. Sir, their energy output isn't linear. the tactical officer stammered. It's exponential. No, that's not right. It's recursive. It keeps increasing without consumption loss. Threx's mandibles tightened. Explain it properly. I can't, the officer snapped back, fear breaking protocol. It's like they're not using energy, they're accessing it. Then it happened. The human fleet fired. There was no dramatic beam. No visible projectile. No warning. Just a ripple. A distortion across space so subtle at first that several Dominion officers didn't even register it. Until ships began to disappear. Not explode. Not break apart. Simply vanish. A Dominion destroyer at the edge of formation flickered once, its hull bending inward as if crushed by invisible hands, then collapsed into nothingness. Another followed. Then 10 more. Entire battle lines blinked out of existence, as though they had been erased from a map that no longer acknowledged them. What is happening? Threx roared. Unknown phenomenon, the sensor officer screamed. There's no kinetic impact, no energy signature we can trace. It's like reality is being rewritten at the point of contact. On the human flagship, silence reigned. Not fear. Not hesitation. Focus. A young Terran officer swallowed hard. First contact engagement successful. Another voice added, quieter, they're not resisting. Varn's eyes remained fixed on the battlefield. They are, he said softly. They just don't understand how. Across the void, Dominion fleets began to break formation. Panic spread faster than destruction. Fall back, one captain screamed. We are outmatched, withdraw. But there was nowhere to withdraw to, because the human armada had already surrounded them. Completely. Perfectly. No gaps, no blind spots, no escape vectors. And then the silence changed. A new signal appeared on every Dominion channel. Not human. Not alien. Something else. Something vast enough that even the human fleet paused for a fraction of a second. Threx felt it before the sensors confirmed it. A pressure, like something enormous turning its attention toward the battlefield. What now? He whispered. The tactical display flickered violently. Then beyond the edges of known space, something began to emerge. Not ships, not fleets, but shapes. Massive, impossible structures folding into reality, as though space itself was struggling to contain them. The sensor officer's voice broke completely. Commander, those aren't human vessels. Threx stared, dread creeping in for the first time. Then what are they? A long pause. Then the answer came in a whisper. They were already here. On the human flagship, alarms blared for the first time. Varn's expression darkened. So, he said quietly, they're awake. And in the distance, something older than war began to move. The void beyond the battlefield did not behave like space anymore. It folded, not like fabric tearing, but like reality itself remembering something it had once forgotten and trying to force it back into existence. The structures emerging from the darkness were not ships in any traditional sense. They were vast geometric impossibilities, angled masses of lightless matter suspended in shifting fields of distortion. Entire sections of space bent around them as if unwilling to acknowledge their presence directly. On every Dominion bridge, alarms screamed without pause. Extra-dimensional mass confirmed. Gravitational constant instability detected across sector. Commander, those things are larger than Moon-class constructs. Threx stood frozen, staring at the tactical display as it struggled to maintain coherent readings. This can't be real, he whispered. But it was. And worse, it was reacting. Not randomly, not chaotically, but intelligently. The ancient structures were orienting toward the battlefield, toward the humans, and toward the Dominion fleet caught between them. On the human flagship Erebus Dawn, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The calm discipline of the bridge had tightened into controlled urgency. Officers moved faster now, but not panicked, focused, trained for something that had always been theoretical. Captain Elias Varn stood at the center of the command deck, eyes locked on the incoming anomalies. "So it's them," one officer said quietly. Varn didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained steady. "Yes," he said finally, "the custodians." A few officers exchanged tense glances. No one liked hearing that name spoken aloud. A tactical analyst swallowed. "We confirmed they were dormant, contained, observing only." "They were," Varn corrected, "until we forced their attention." A sudden tremor passed through the ship, not physical, but conceptual, as if space itself had momentarily tightened around them. Sensors screamed again. Reality shear increasing. Structural coherence across fleet is fluctuating. On Dominion ships, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "What are they doing?" a commander demanded. "Are they attacking?" "No," the sensor officer shouted. "They're not targeting us, they're locking onto the humans." Threx turned sharply. "Explain." The officer hesitated. "It's like the human fleet triggered a recognition response. Those structures are aligning their field geometry directly with Terran signatures." A pause. Then more quietly, "They're ignoring us." That hit harder than any weapon fire. Ignoring. The Dominion, an empire that had dominated half the galaxy, was being treated as irrelevant background noise. And the humans were the focus. On the human bridge, Varn exhaled slowly. "Move all ships into defensive lattice formation," he ordered. "Sir," an officer said carefully, "our data suggests no known defense works against them." "I know," Varn replied. "Then why are we?" "Because we are not defending against them," Varn interrupted. A pause. "We are preparing to survive what comes after they decide what we are." Silence fell across the bridge. Even seasoned officers felt it now, that pressure building in the fabric of space, like something enormous pressing its attention against their reality. The custodians moved. Not forward, not backward, but around. Their massive structures rotated through dimensions, reconfiguring themselves in ways that made sensor interpretation unstable. Entire segments appeared to pass through one another without collision, as if existing in different layers of the same space. Then a signal arrived. Not broadcast, not transmitted, but imposed. Every ship in the sector received it simultaneously. Dominion, human, even distant monitoring stations far beyond the battlefield. A voice without source, without origin, without direction. Unauthorized convergence detected. The words were not spoken in language, but translated instantly into comprehension. Threx staggered slightly. "What is this?" The voice continued. "Containment breach of observation field. Primary directive compromised." On the human bridge, tension sharpened. "This is it," Varn said quietly. "They're deciding." An officer looked up. "Deciding what, sir?" But Varn didn't answer. Because he already knew. Across the battlefield, the custodians began to respond, not with weapons, not with fleets, but with structure. Space itself started to contract around the human armada. Slowly, precisely, inescapably. A containment field forming at a scale no Dominion scientist could even model. "Gravitational collapse vectors forming," a Dominion officer screamed. "We're being pulled into a spatial boundary event." But again, it wasn't aimed at them. The Dominion ships were simply caught in the same space. Collateral existence. Threx realized it all at once. "This isn't a battle," he whispered. "This is a correction." On the human flagship, Varn finally tightened his grip on the command rail. "All fleets," he said calmly, "prepare for existential containment." A pause. Then, "They are about to decide whether we are allowed to remain real." And in the darkness beyond the stars, something ancient began to close its hand around the galaxy. The containment field did not look like anything. It couldn't, because what it did was not visual, it was conceptual. Space across the battlefield began to lose consistency, like a thought unraveling mid-sentence. Stars bent into non-Euclidean angles, Distances stopped behaving predictably. Entire regions of the map flickered between here, not here, and never existed. On Dominion ships, systems failed in cascading waves. Navigation is collapsing. Time sync error across all fleets. Commander, our position updates are contradicting themselves. Threx grabbed the console, forcing himself to focus through the rising instability. Hold formation, he snapped. Do not break alignment. But formation didn't matter anymore. Nothing conventional mattered. Because the custodians were not attacking. They were editing. On the human flagship Erebus Dawn, alarms had shifted tone. Less urgent now, more restrained. Like the ship itself had accepted that normal protocol no longer applied. Captain Elias Varn stood still at the center of the bridge. The custodians, containment field pressed in from all directions now, tightening like an invisible sphere closing around the entire sector. Structural coherence dropping to 60%, a technician reported. 50, sir. Physics stability is failing across the grid. Varn nodded once. Stabilize internal reference frames. We're already running full anchors. It's not enough. A pause. Nothing we're using is enough. That truth hung in the air without resistance. Because they all knew it. This was not a battle of firepower. It was a battle of permission to exist. On Dominion channels, panic finally broke discipline entirely. We should withdraw. Withdraw to where? Space is collapsing behind us. They're locking the entire sector. Threx's mandibles tightened so hard they clicked audibly. And then something changed. A new signal emerged. Not from the custodians. Not from the humans. But from within the human fleet itself. A deep resonance passed through Terran ships, slow, synchronized, almost like a heartbeat spreading across thousands of vessels at once. On the human bridge, Varn closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them again. Phase seal engaged, he said quietly. Several officers stiffened. Sir, one began carefully. That level of output requires full fleet convergence. We lose mobility after activation. I know, Vern replied. Another officer leaned forward. Sir, if we commit to phase seal inside a custodian containment field. We stop asking if it is safe, Varn interrupted softly, and start asking if it is necessary. Silence followed. Then across the human armada, every ship responded. Energy channels aligned. Core systems synchronized. And for the first time since the engagement began, the Terran fleet stopped moving entirely. They became still. Not passive. Not idle. But anchored. A structured refusal to be displaced by whatever came next. On Dominion screens, the custodian field reacted immediately. The containment sphere tightened further. Spatial compression increasing, a sensor officer shouted. They're forcing everything inward. Threx looked up sharply and saw it. The human fleet was not resisting outward pressure. They were resisting inward collapse. They were holding the line of existence itself. But it was costing them. Hull stress readings began to spike across Terran ships. Energy systems strained under impossible load. Entire vessels flickered in and out of phase with normal space. Sir, a Terran engineer said quietly, we're losing synchronization across outer formations. Varn didn't look away from the display. Hold. A pause. Even if we fragment. Hold. The engineer swallowed hard. Yes, sir. On Dominion ships, something unexpected happened. The pressure increased, but so did clarity. For the first time, Threx saw it not as chaos, but structure. The custodians were not destroying indiscriminately. They were isolating something. The humans. Everything else, the Dominion fleet, debris fields, distant observers, were simply caught in the same collapsing boundary. Collateral containment. A tactical officer spoke slowly. Commander, I think we're not the target. Threx turned sharply. Explain. We are not being destroyed, the officer said. We are being classified. A pause. By proximity. That word landed like a blade. Classified. Not enemy. Not threat. Just categorized existence. The custodian's field tightened again. And this time, something new happened. The human fleet began to fracture. Not breaking. Not dying. But separating. Individual ships pulled slightly out of alignment as containment pressure increased. Structural divergence detected, a Terran officer shouted, fleet cohesion dropping. On the bridge, tension spiked for the first time since the engagement began. Sir, someone said urgently, we can't maintain full lattice integrity much longer. Varn's expression didn't change, but his voice lowered. Then we transition. A pause. All units, he said into the command channel. Prepare for revelation protocol. On Dominion channels, Threx heard it too. And for the first time since the battle began, he felt something colder than fear. Curiosity, because whatever came next was something even the humans had been hiding. And the galaxy was about to see it. The command echoed across the human armada like a trigger inside a sealed system. Revelation protocol initiated. For a brief instant, nothing changed. Then every Terran ship began to open. Not physically, not explosively, but structurally, like layers of reality peeling back one by one. On Dominion sensors, alarms instantly shifted into unreadable chaos. Sir, I'm losing classification on human vessels. They're expanding their signatures. That's not possible. Ships don't expand presence density. Commander Threx stared as the human fleet stopped behaving like a fleet entirely. The sleek warships were still there, still visible, but something beneath them was now coming forward, something that had been hidden inside them since the first moment they appeared. On the human flagship Erebus Dawn, the bridge lighting dimmed automatically as secondary systems activated. The air felt heavier, as if the ship itself had become aware of something deeper within its structure. Captain Elias Varn stood perfectly still. Bring all layers online, he ordered. A pause. Then every Terran ship responded in unison. Across the fleet, hulls split along invisible seams, not breaking apart, but revealing nested internal architectures that should not have fit inside their original forms. Ships unfolded into themselves, exposing complex multi-layered systems of impossible depth. It was not engineering anymore. It was revelation of concealment. On Dominion screens, entire human vessels now appeared as stacked realities, each ship containing multiple operational states existing simultaneously. A sensor officer backed away from his console. They weren't built like this. Threx didn't respond, because he was finally beginning to understand. The humans had never shown their true fleet. Not once. What the Dominion had been fighting was only the surface layer. And now that surface was breaking. The custodians reacted immediately. The containment field tightened violently. Space contracted further, forcing all structures toward a central point of compression. Entire regions of reality groaned under the strain of forced coherence. Spatial integrity dropping below critical thresholds, someone shouted on a Dominion bridge. We're being compressed into a singular reference frame. But the human fleet did not collapse. They answered. On Varn's command, every Terran vessel aligned again, but differently this time. Not as a formation, but as a network of synchronized realities. Stabilize Revelation Layer 1, Varn said calmly. Energy rippled outward from the fleet, not as a blast, but as a counterstructure, a framework imposed against the collapsing field. And for the first time since the custodians arrived, the compression slowed. On Dominion ships, confusion turned into disbelief. They're resisting the field. No one resists custodian containment. Threx's mandibles tightened. What are they doing? A tactical officer swallowed. They're not resisting it, Commander. A pause. They're matching it. That changed everything. Because containment fields worked by enforcing asymmetry, one force dominating another, one reality overriding the rest. But the humans were not weaker. They were equalizing the structure. On the human bridge, a junior officer spoke quietly. "Sir, Revelation Layer 1 is stable, but we're approaching saturation limits." Varn nodded once. "Proceed to Layer 2. There was a hesitation across the bridge. Even seasoned officers reacted to that. A systems analyst looked up. "Sir, Layer 2 was never tested outside simulation." "I know," Varn said. "And Layer 3?" another officer asked, voice tight. Varn's eyes stayed fixed on the collapsing battlefield. "We may not reach Layer 3. Silence followed. Then the order went out. Across the fleet, the next phase activated. And everything changed again. Human ships did not just reveal structure anymore. They began to invert it. What had been internal systems became external fields. What had been hull integrity became distributed across space itself. The fleet was no longer contained within ships. The ships were contained within the fleet. On Dominion sensors, reality broke into fragments of contradictory data. They're not in space anymore. They're defining a new reference topology. That's not a fleet, that's a distributed structure across spacetime. Threx staggered slightly, gripping the console. For the first time, he saw it clearly. The custodians were compressing reality to evaluate it. The humans were expanding reality to survive it. And between those two forces, the Dominion fleet was irrelevant. A casualty of scale. On the battlefield, custodian structures began to shift again. Slowly, carefully, like something reassessing a problem it had not anticipated encountering. A new signal formed across all channels. The same source as before, but different now. More focused. Containment inefficiency detected. Adaptive response required. On the human flagship, Varn's expression darkened. "They've adjusted." A pause. "This is where it becomes dangerous." An officer looked up. "Sir, what happens when they fully adapt?" Varn didn't answer immediately. Because everyone already knew. When something that large learns you exist, it does not stop observing. It begins to correct. And deep in the collapsing void of space, the custodians prepared their next response. The adjustment came without warning. No buildup, no signal spike, no transitional phase. One moment, the custodian containment field was compressing reality in a controlled, measurable collapse. The next, it changed its mind about physics. Space inverted. Not exploded, not fractured. Inverted. Every coordinate across the battlefield redefined itself in a single, silent rewrite. Ships that were in front of each other were suddenly beside, behind, above, and inside overlapping states of existence that should not have coexisted. On Dominion bridges, systems failed instantly. Navigation grid corrupted. All positional data invalid. "Commander, stars are moving relative to us." Threx staggered as the tactical display dissolved into meaningless noise. Even his own ship's position marker flickered like it was uncertain whether it still had permission to exist. And then the pressure came. Not physical, not gravitational. Something worse. A decision being applied to reality. On the human flagship Erebus Dawn, alarms finally escalated beyond structured tone. They were no longer reporting errors. They were reporting judgment. Captain Elias Varn stood motionless. "This is it," he said quietly. The bridge fell silent. Across the fleet, every Terran vessel stabilized into final alignment. Revelation Layers 1 and 2 fully engaged. Systems locked. No further expansion possible. A systems officer swallowed. "Sir, custodian field is transitioning into final compression phase." Another voice followed, tighter. "We're being evaluated." Varn nodded once. "Yes." A pause stretched across the bridge. Then an engineer asked the question no one wanted to ask. "What happens if we fail evaluation?" Varn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the vast, collapsing battlefield outside, at the Dominion fleet caught helplessly between impossible forces, and at the custodian structures slowly resolving into something even more defined. Then he said, "We won't fail. Not because of confidence, because of preparation. Activate phase anchor. On command, every Terran ship responded. And for the first time since the battle began, something opened at the center of the human formation. Not a weapon, not a shield, a gap, a controlled absence of structure. On Dominion sensors, alarms spiked violently. "What is that?" someone screamed. "They're creating a void pocket inside the containment field." Threx's mandibles tightened. "They're doing what?" "Sir, it's not a void collapse. It's a deliberate non-space insertion. They're making a region where custodian rules don't apply." That sentence shouldn't have been possible. But it was happening. The human fleet was carving out a pocket of reality where the custodians' compression field could not stabilize. And inside that pocket, something began to form. Slowly, deliberately, a structure unlike anything seen before. Not made of matter, not energy, but decision. On the human bridge, Varn spoke softly. "Open the door." A pause. Every Terran ship synchronized, and the void at the center of their formation split open. Not outward, not inward, but elsewhere. A tier in containment logic itself. On Dominion channels, panic erupted. "They've created a breach point. Commander, something is emerging from the gap." Threx stared frozen as the impossible unfolded. Because the door was not leading into space. It was leading into something that space had been protecting them from. The custodians reacted instantly. The containment field shifted focus, redirecting pressure toward the breach. But it was too late. The door was already open. And through it, something looked back. Not the custodians. Not the humans. Something older than both. A presence so vast that even the custodians hesitated for the first time. A signal spread across all channels. Not translated. Not interpreted. Direct comprehension. Unauthorized access to sealed substrate detected. A pause. Then, containment hierarchy compromised. On the human flagship, Varn closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Then opened them. "So that's what they were hiding," he whispered. An officer turned sharply. "Sir." But Varn was already watching the door widen. Because now there were three forces in the battlefield. The Dominion, trapped and irrelevant. The custodians, losing control. And something beyond both. Responding to the breach. And as the void split further open, the galaxy prepared to learn why some doors were never meant to exist. The moment the door fully opened, the battlefield stopped behaving like a battlefield. It stopped behaving like anything at all. Space lost direction. Time lost sequence. Cause and effect began to overlap in unstable loops, like reality trying to decide which version of events was allowed to exist. The custodians reacted first. Not with aggression, with retreat. Across Dominion sensors, that fact alone shattered morale more completely than any weapon ever could. "Commander, they're withdrawing," a voice shouted. "The custodian structures are pulling back." Threx froze. That should not have been possible. The custodians did not retreat. They did not negotiate. They did not yield. They corrected. But now, something in the opened breach had forced them to step away. On the human flagship Erebus Dawn, the bridge was silent except for strained system reports. Phase anchor holding barely. Revelation layers destabilizing under external pressure. "Sir, the entity beyond the breach is expanding its observation field." Captain Elias Varn stood at the center of it all, unmoving. "Status of Dominion fleet?" he asked calmly. A pause. Then a tactical officer answered, almost absently. "They are no longer a factor in engagement." Varn nodded once. "Maintain containment perimeter around them anyway." No one questioned it. Because everyone could see it now. The Dominion fleet, once terrifying, once dominant, was drifting through collapsing fragments of space like debris caught in a storm they never understood. Weapons offline, engines unstable, shields flickering between states of existence. They were not defeated. They were irrelevant. The real conflict had moved beyond them, beyond even the custodians, because now the breach had fully stabilized, and something was coming through. At first, it was not visible, only felt, a pressure at the edge of perception, like consciousness itself being observed from a higher angle. Then space parted further. Not torn, not broken, opened, and through it there was no ship, no form, only structure that refused definition. It existed in multiple interpretations at once, each contradicting the last, all equally true and equally impossible. Even custodian constructs seemed small in comparison, not physically, but conceptually, like tools beside the hand that made them. On Dominion bridges, several officers collapsed. "What is that?" someone whispered. No one answered, because language failed first. On the human flagship, alarms went quiet. Not because the threat was gone, because the systems could no longer categorize it as a threat. A senior analyst spoke slowly. "It's not entering our space." A pause. "It's redefining what space means in its vicinity." Varn finally exhaled. "So it exists above the custodians." No one responded, because saying it aloud made it real. The entity, whatever it was, did not attack. It observed, and in that observation, the battlefield changed again. The custodians stabilized their retreat, reorganizing at a distance like wounded giants, recalculating a problem they could not solve. The Dominion fleet, meanwhile, drifted further into silence. Some ships attempted emergency warp jumps, others powered down entirely. A few simply vanished as if losing permission to remain consistent. But none of that mattered anymore, because the entity beyond the breach focused fully on the human armada. On them, on why they were still here. On the human bridge, tension returned, not panic but something deeper. A recognition that they were now being measured by something that did not share their assumptions about existence. A junior officer spoke quietly. "Sir, it's evaluating us." Varn nodded. "Yes." Another officer hesitated. "And if we fail this evaluation?" Varn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the fleet, at every ship that had followed him into the impossible. "We already failed once," he said softly. A pause. "That's why we built the second answer." On command, the entire Terran Armada shifted again. Not into formation, not into defense, but into statement. Every ship aligned across dimensions of structure, energy, and probability. The revelation layers stabilized into a single coherent presence. Not a fleet, a declaration. Across the void, the entity paused. For the first time, it did not immediately comprehend. And in that moment of hesitation, humanity did something the galaxy had never seen before. They spoke, not in signal, not in transmission, but in structured reality output. A message written into existence itself. "We are humanity." A pause. "We do not belong to your hierarchy." Another pause. "But we persist within it." The entity beyond the breach shifted. The custodians held position, no longer advancing, no longer correcting, simply watching. The Dominion fleet drifted silently, forgotten by everything except memory. And then, the void responded.